Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Agyana Timidandasya Ghananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Jaina Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. So today we're celebrating the appearance day of Srila Bhaktisiddhant Saraswati Thakur. There was a book written by one of Srila Prabhupada's disciples, Rupavilas, called A Ray of Vishnu. And it gives a nice sketch about the life and teachings and accomplishments of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. So we'll go over some of the points covered in that book, written by Rupavilas, A Ray of Vishnu. So, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was born Bhimla Prasad Datta. He was born to, his father's name was Kedarnath Datta, and his mother's name was Bhagavati. So that was on February 6, 1874 in Jagannath Puri. And when, just like previously, I don't know how much today, when the child is born, the astrologer comes and does the child's chart. Do they do that today? Not much. Right? But in the olden days, the astrologer would come and he would give some idea about this child, right? So when that happened, the astrologer noticed that this child had all the 32 markings of a Mahapurush, Hare Krishna, a great personality, all 32 markings. Right? In the Shastra, it's described that certain bodily features are there of a Mahapurush. It means a great person. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, this young child of Bhimla Prasad, Kedarnath Datta, had all these markings. So when he was 6 months old, there was the Rath Yatra. And if you've ever been to Jagannath Puri, the place where Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was born, that particular house, is on the Grand Road. It's about a quarter of the way from Sri Mandir to Gundicha. Right? And at that time, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, the father of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who was known at that time as Bhimla Prasad, he was the district magistrate, okay? Now it was the British Raj at that time, and the district magistrate, that position, was a very prominent government position, and it was the highest office that an Indian could have in the British Raj, district magistrate. So because of his position, the cart stopped in front of his house, and Bhaktivinoda Thakur's wife could get on the cart. So she took the opportunity to bring her new child, this Bhimla Prasad, and give the child darshan of Jagannath. So just when that happened, the garland fell from Lord Jagannath and right on the new baby. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur ki. And at that time, they did his Anna procession, right? Grains. And as the custom was, they would put some coins and put a Bhagavatam and see which direction the child would go for in life. And immediately this small child went for the Bhagavatam, right? Which gave an indication about the future of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. That he would be a great promoter and speaker of Srimad Bhagavatam. Now, Srila Prabhupada explains how when Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was a small child, he was 3.5, 4 years old, something like that, not more than that. And his father brought a whole tokri of mangoes, nice ripe mangoes. Right? So when the small child saw the mangoes, he took one and he said, "This is my mango." Right? So his father admonished him, "What? You're taking mango? It's not offered to deity yet? How can you do that?" Oh. Then the child took it very seriously. And from that time, he never ate mangoes. And Srila Prabhupada personally witnessed that people would bring fresh mangoes and offer it to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and he would say, "No, I don't take, I'm an offender." There was no offense, small child, right? No offense. But still, he took the instruction of his father, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, so seriously, right, that he, throughout his whole life, he never ate mangoes. That takes a lot of determination, don't you think? Not an ordinary thing. We make New Year's resolutions, and we can't even keep them till January 2nd, right? And throughout his whole life, he never took mangoes. He grew up not long after, maybe when he was just 1 year old, his father's duty shifted to a place called Ranagat. If you're Bengali, you know where that is. No, it says in the book Ranagat. He lived in Ranagat. And he grew up in Ranagat in his early childhood. Yeah, Birnagar's nearby. But anyway, that's on, if you go on the way to Mayapur, you'll cross Ranagat. And yeah, Birnagar's not far. So he grew up there and did his schooling there. And by the time he was 7 years old, he had memorized the whole Bhagavad-gita. All the verses, 700 verses from Bhagavad-gita he had memorized. And especially he excelled in understanding the Vedic literatures. So much so that he was awarded the name Siddhanta Saraswati by his teachers. He wasn't very much interested in material subjects. He liked to read scriptures, right? But when it came time for his exams, although he didn't study so much material things, he passed all the exams, right? And he had a photogenic memory. If he heard something one time, years later he could remember it. So, like that, he also invented a type of shorthand, right, called Bikanto. And he was only 11 years old when he developed this type of shorthand. And he, Bhaktivinoda Thakur had started a sabha called the Vishva Vaishnav Raj Sabha, which was a collection of devotees who would contribute various theses about the topic of bhakti and how to perform bhakti. So he attended also those classes and discourses. And from a very early age, he was good at debating. He would enter into debates, and he was such a powerful debater that persons were afraid to actually debate him, right? They would try to avoid meeting him because they would be defeated. And we see a parallel in the life of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who defeated the famous poet from Kashmir, the Cage of Kashmiri, right? He was in a Sanskrit college later on when he became a teenager. He was there in the Sanskrit college and doing very well. But he left the college. And the reason he gave was that if he went to college and he pursued his studies like that, there would be many people that would come forward for marrying him to their daughter or this and that. He would be forced to marry, enter into household life, and he didn't want to do that, so he left his Sanskrit studies. And then later on, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur had a printing press, and he was printing the Sajjana Toshini magazine fortnightly, and Srila Bhaktisiddhant Saraswati Thakur was also helping with the press, right? So from an early age, he was engaged in printing literatures. Bhaktivinoda Thakur built a place, and when they were excavating that place, they found a kurma deity, and that was given to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur by his father, and he worshipped that deity very regularly, right from an early age, just as a young child. And later on, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur suggested that he take initiation from Srila Gaur Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj. Now, Gaur Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj was residing there in Navadvip, and he was chanting so many rounds every day. That was his business. He was chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. And he was very close to Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur recommended that you take initiation. His son should take initiation from Srila Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj. So he approached him and he asked him for initiation. Now, Srila Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj wasn't really initiating anyone. He was just absorbed in chanting the holy name. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. So when he approached him for initiation, he said, no, I'm Angoti Chap, but not a very learned person. And you're such a scholarly person, so learned, you better take from somebody else. But Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he insisted, no, I'll take initiation from you. And Gaur Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj said, okay, I'll ask Mahaprabhu, I'll let you know. So some time passed, and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he again approached Gaur Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj and said, I want to get initiation. What did Mahaprabhu say? And he said, oh, I forgot to ask him. So then Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said, if you don't give me initiation, what will I do? My life will be wasted. So there's no use living this life if you don't initiate me. So because he was threatening to do away with himself if he didn't get initiated by Srila Kishore Das Babaji, Gaur Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj, Gaur Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj could understand this is a very serious person, and he agreed to give him initiation. So in 1900, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur took initiation from Srila Gaur Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj, and his name became Varsha Bhanavi Devi Daitya Das. But that only happened after persistent pleas to get initiated. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he took employment from the king of Tripura. And from 1895 to 1905, he worked for the king doing editing and teaching. And he helped the king in his kingdom in Tripura. At that time there were kings that had allegiance to the British Raj. And he helped him in many ways to reform the economic basis of the kingdom and many other managerial ideas he also gave to that Maharaj. But at the same time he was teaching, educating, and editing literatures. From the year 1897 onward, he started to strictly follow Chaturmasha. And you know, sometimes, I remember in the 1970s, some of the devotees were like following Chaturmasha, and they'd have a beard, because part of it is not to shave. But there's a lot more to strictly following Chaturmasha than just growing a beard, Srila Prabhupada said, right? And here he would take grains that were dried in the sun, right? And they would be on the floor, and as much as he could eat with kneeling down, eating grains off the floor, that much he would eat only in a day, right? Pretty strict, right? So when Srila Prabhupada saw that some devotees were growing beards and they said they were following Chaturmasha, Prabhupada said, Chaturmasha means more than just growing a beard. Right? He went on a tour of all the holy places. He visited holy places in South India and in Orissa and Bengal with Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. And he was offered a post in Calcutta University. But he declined that post. And rather he was staying with his father, who had made a center in Jagannath Puri called the Bhakti Kutir, which is a place where Bhaktivinoda Thakur was doing his bhajan. So he was staying there with Bhaktivinoda Thakur. And if you, actually ISKCON has acquired that place, and it's just near the samadhi of Srila Haridas Thakur, is the bhajan kutir of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So he was staying there. And sometime earlier, there was an incident that occurred there. There was one Radha Charandas Babaji, and he had invented a new mantra. I don't know if you heard that before. It's called Nitai Gaur Radhe Shyam Hare Krishna Hare Ram. Right? So these followers of Radha Charandas Babaji, they're still in charge of Haridas Thakur Samadhi. And that's their kirtan. Nitai Gaur Radhe Shyam Hare Krishna Hare Ram. But there's some philosophical misunderstanding in that mantra. And Srila Bhaktisiddhant Saraswati Thakur was very vocal about it. And they would chant that, and they would chant japa like this. Now, we don't chant japa like that, do we? No. Prabhupada describes the way we chant japa is that loud enough for us to hear and loud enough for others to hear. That's how we chant japa. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram. So, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he was preaching the correct understanding of chanting japa and the correct mantras. I remember in Srila Prabhupada, when he was in the last days, when he was not well, just behind our Krishna Balaram temple, there was a center, and they had a 24-hour kirtan of this mantra that I said. Nitai Gaur Radhe Shyam Hare Krishna Hare Ram. So Prabhupada was listening to that. And because the mantra is not really authorized, it has some philosophical wrong conclusions in the mantra. Srila Prabhupada says, they say like that, but our mantra is Nitai Gaur Radhe Shyam Jaya Krishna Balaram. Because those are the deities in our temple. Nitai Gaur Radhe Shyam Jaya Krishna Balaram. So, anyway, after some time, the followers of this Radha Charandas Babaji, they were very upset with him, and so much so that Bhaktivinoda Thakur said, better that you go away. So he went, after that he went to Mayapur, and he was living in Mayapur, and he made a vow to chant 1 billion names, right? And he was chanting, I think he was chanting 197 rounds a day, right? How many rounds do we chant a day? 16, right? And we struggle. Can you imagine chanting 197 rounds a day? Huh? It's all day chanting. So he was so absorbed in his chanting and living very, very simply. He lived in a small hut at that time, Mayapur. What was there? At the Yoga Pit, right? The birthplace of Lord Chaitanya. He was chanting his rounds in this grass hut. And during the rainy season, the hut would leak, right? So instead of repairing the hut, he would just put an umbrella up and keep chanting. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. So he was living there, chanting his rounds, right? Very austerely living. And Srila Gaur-Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj gave him an instruction. One of the instructions he gave him was, never go to Calcutta. Calcutta is Maya. Stay here in Mayapur. Don't go to Calcutta. So he was staying there in Mayapur. But at some point, he understood that the mission needed to be pushed forward. And actually his father had always prayed to the Lord that you please send one ray of Vishnu, one empowered person to spread Krishna consciousness and to spread Mahaprabhu's movement, right? And his preaching mission, he became inspired to do preaching. And there were certain incidents that happened, that encouraged him. This was sometime after his Guru Maharaj had left the planet, and that's very interesting also, because when Kishoredas Babaji Maharaj left the world, he had, there were some local Babajis who wanted to take his body and put it in samadhi near their centers where they stayed, because he was quite popular and people would seek his blessings and they would earn some money out of that. But he was very determined that they should not have anything to do with the samadhi of his Guru Maharaj. So he came to them, these Babajis that were claiming to take the transcendental form of Kishoredas Babaji Maharaj and put it in samadhi. And he said in front of all of them that if you want to touch my Guru Maharaj's body and take it for samadhi, no problem, but the one who hasn't had illicit sexual connection with a woman in the last year, then you come. But none of them came. He said, all right, in 6 months, then you come. None of them came. He said, all right, last night. Still none of them came. So he claimed the transcendental form of Srila Kishoredas Babaji Maharaj and put it in samadhi in what's called the Mama Badi, Chaitanya Mat. And there you can go even to this day and have darshan of Srila Kishoredas Babaji Maharaj Samadhi in the Chaitanya Mat in Mayapur, along with also the Samadhi of Srila Bhaktisiddhant Saraswati Thakur. And at that time he was living there, but he decided to start his preaching mission, right? And he felt that taking sannyas would be important for his preaching mission. And of course he didn't have any godbrothers. He was the only disciple of Srila Kishoredas Babaji Maharaj. But he wanted to take sannyas, so he took sannyas from the photograph of Kishoredas Babaji Maharaj. And he came, and he became at that time Srila Bhaktisiddhant Saraswati Goswami Maharaj. And he also started the preaching from Calcutta in, what was the name of that? Ultadanga, number 1 Ultadanga in Calcutta. And there he started the Gaudiya Math. And actually that was the place from which Srila Prabhupada met Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur at that same Ultadanga in Calcutta where the Gaudiya Math started. And so it's interesting to note that now that Ultadanga has, the property's been acquired by ISKCON, and the place has been renovated up to the standard that it was in those days, maybe even better, right? And the place where Srila Prabhupada met Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur is also there. So if you're in Calcutta, make sure that you visit that Ultadanga and see where Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur started the Gaudiya Math, and also where Srila Prabhupada met Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. It's a very important place for our movement. Srila Prabhupada was, from a young child, his father would invite every day sadhus into the house, and that's one of the cultures of Vaishnavism, is that householders should, invite sadhus to their house and feed them, right? So Srila Prabhupada's father, Gaur Mohan Dey, he regularly did that. So Srila Prabhupada had seen lots of sadhus in his lifetime, and different kinds, and he wasn't so much impressed with sadhus. But his friend, Chittaranand Das, was insistent that he come and meet this sadhu is different, this sadhu is special, right? And the reason why he was insisting, Prabhupada said, later on, was because Srila Prabhupada was always the leader in his group. Wherever group he was in, he was the leader. Right? And he was considered very brave. He tells a story, Srila Prabhupada, how when he was a young man, at that time they were building the Victoria Memorial. How many people have seen the Victoria Memorial? Right? So when Prabhupada was a kid, they were building that, right? And there was scaffolding all the way up to the top of the Victoria Memorial. So Srila Prabhupada, just as a challenge, he climbed all the way up the scaffolding to the top of the Victoria Memorial, right? He tells that. So he was just mentioning about his childhood, what was happening. And one of the devotees said, "Oh, Srila Prabhupada, you were so brave." And he turned to the devotee and he said, "Still I'm brave." He said, "Otherwise, how could I go to America alone and spread Krishna consciousness?" Srila Prabhupada ki. So he mentions that particular incident of meeting his Guru Maharaj in a purport, Srimad Bhagavatam, 1st Canto, Chapter 12, text number 30. Srila Jiva Goswami remarks in this connection that every child, if given an impression of the Lord from his very childhood, certainly becomes a great devotee of the Lord, like Maharaj Parikshit. One may not be as fortunate as Maharaj Parikshit to have the opportunity to see the Lord in the womb of his mother, but even if he cannot be so fortunate, he can be made so if the parents of the child desire him to be so. There is a practical example in my personal life in this connection. My father was a pure devotee of the Lord, and when I was only 4 or 5 years old, my father gave me a couple of forms of Radha and Krishna. In a playful manner, I used to worship these deities along with my sister, and I used to imitate the performances of neighboring temple of Radha Govinda. By constantly visiting this neighboring temple and copying the ceremonies in connection with my own deities of play, I developed a natural affinity for the Lord. My father used to observe all the ceremonies befitting my position. Later on, these activities were suspended due to my association in the schools and colleges. I became completely out of practice. But in my youthful days, when I met my spiritual master, Srimad Bhaktisiddhant Saraswati Goswami Maharaj, again I revived my old habit, and the same playful deities became my worshipful deities in proper regulation. This was followed up until I left the family connection. And I'm pleased that my generous father gave the first impression, which was developed later into regulative devotional service by his divine grace. Maharaj Prahlad also advised that such impressions of a godly relation must be impregnated from the beginning of childhood. Otherwise, one may miss the opportunity of the human form of life, which is very valuable, although it is temporary like others. So Srila Prabhupada explains here how the impact of meeting Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was on his life, right? He again took up his deity worship, although it was a playful thing, and it had been suspended for some time, but he again took it up seriously after meeting Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. That was in the year 1922, again in the same place, Ultadanga, at the insistence of his friend. So when he went there, at that time Srila Prabhupada was a follower of Gandhi, and he was all caught up in the freedom movement, the nationalistic movement of to become free from the British rule. This was in 1922, right? So when he went there and met Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who was speaking about Lord Chaitanya and Lord Chaitanya's mission, he put forward the argument that unless, because the country is subjugated, how will we spread the mission of Lord Chaitanya? Kind of challenged Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. But he said later on that he was thoroughly defeated by the explanation of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And his impression was, when he left that the mission of Lord Chaitanya is in very good hands. And from that first meeting, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur had inspired Srila Prabhupada by saying that, why don't you spread this Krishna consciousness movement in the English-speaking, to the English-speaking people. So from that very time, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur had given the instruction to preach Krishna consciousness in the West. But at that time, Srila Prabhupada was a householder. He already had one child, and he was also involved in a business, in the chemical medicine business. But he always kept that instruction. And he mentions about that again in the Srimad Bhagavatam, in the first canto, chapter 13, text number 29 in the purport. Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the great preacher of the principles of Srimad Bhagavatam, has stressed the importance of association with sadhus, pure devotees of the Lord. He said that even a moment's association with a pure devotee, one can achieve all perfection. We are not ashamed to admit that this fact was experienced in our practical life. We were favored, were we not favored by His divine grace, Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj, by our first meeting for a few minutes only, it would have been impossible for us to accept this mighty task of describing Srimad Bhagavatam in English. Without seeing him at that opportune moment, we could have become a very great business magnate, but never would we have been able to walk the path of liberation and be engaged in the factual service of the Lord under the instructions of His divine grace. And here is another practical example by the action of Vidura's association with Dhritarashtra. Maharaj Dhritarashtra is tightly bound in a network of material affinities related to politics, economy, and family attachment, and he did everything in his power to achieve so-called success in his planned projects. But he was frustrated from the very beginning to the end so far as his material activities were concerned. And yet, despite his life of failure, he achieved the greatest of all success in self-realization by the forceful instructions of a pure devotee of the Lord, who is the typical emblem of a sadhu. The scriptures enjoin, therefore, that one should associate with sadhus only, rejecting all kinds of association, and by doing so, one will have ample opportunity to hear the sadhus who can cut to pieces the bonds of illusory affection in this material world. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So Srila Prabhupada is giving all the credit to Srila Bhaktisiddhant Saraswati Thakur. And when he was in Los Angeles in 1975, he explained the same thing. Now at that time he had many thousands of disciples, and there was at least 100 centers in 1975, maybe more, all over the world. And his books were being sold in large quantities, right? And he had such stalwart disciples. He said about Brahmananda, he will kill for me if I tell him. They were so surrendered to him, right? But what did Srila Prabhupada say in 1975, Los Angeles? I have no qualification. No qualification. My only qualification is I tried to satisfy my Guru Maharaj. This is the qualification of spiritual life. Nothing else. So, Srila Prabhupada goes on to explain, and we should learn from this that we should keep association with devotees of the Lord. Whatever happens, keep an association of devotees. Don't take on associations of the non-devotees. That will not, and don't take on the qualities of the non-devotees. It's easy to discern who's a devotee and who's not a devotee. Prabhupada said, it's not hard. Who's a Vaishnava? A Vaishnava has no envy. He's not jealous, right? That kind of association is so powerful. Just a few moments in Ultadanga of associating with Srila Prabhupada, see the result. In Prabhupada's hand it was described, the astrologer said, that he'll become a very big businessman. And he had his own pharmaceutical business. It was doing very nicely in Prayag, right? But it all failed, right? And he gives the analogy of Dhritarashtra. Dhritarashtra had a very big materialistic plan, right? His sons would be in charge. They would conquer the Pandavas, but it all failed, right? But still he was successful. Why was he successful? Because of the association of Vidura. And he gives his own example. When he got on the boat to go to America, at that time, right, he had sons, he had family members, right? But it was all just a list of names, he said. There was no glory in it. And he had no money. When he got on the boat, he had 40 rupees. Right? And as you know, rupees, even today, they don't have value in America, so technically he had nothing. Right? And when he got off the boat, Brahmananda tells this story, he heard it from Prabhupada, that he wanted to give a gift to the captain, because the Captain Pandey was a very pious man. And Srimati Maharaji had gone out of her way to find a very good captain. You know, sailors are kind of notorious for things, right? They say about sailors they got a girlfriend in every port, right? But this captain was so pious, he used to bring his wife with him on the ship, right? And she cooked, and he was taken care of very nicely, so he wanted to give something. So he offered his set, the 3 volumes of Srimad Bhagavatam, the first canto, to Captain Pandey, right? But Captain Pandey insisted on paying for it. So how much to charge? In the book, Srila Prabhupada had printed that the set cost 16 rupees and 80 paisa. So he told the captain, if you want to give, then you can give me $16.80. So the captain gave him a 20 and told him, keep the change. Our Sankirtan devotees do that sometimes, you know. If they get a 20, they keep the change. But in any event, with that $20, he started the Krishna consciousness movement. And when he got off the boat, he didn't know whether to go right or left. But what he said is that he always had the association of his Guru Maharaj by following the instructions very carefully of his Guru Maharaj. He always had his association. This is from another purport of Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd Canto, Chapter 12, text number 42. During student life, the brahmacharis were given full instructions about the importance of the human form of life. Thus, the basic education was designed to encourage the student in becoming free from family encumbrances. Only students unable to accept such a vow in life were allowed to go home and marry a suitable wife. Otherwise, the student would remain a permanent brahmachari, observing complete abstinence from sex life for his whole life. It all depended on the quality of the student's training. We had the opportunity to meet an avowed brahmachari in the personality of our spiritual master, Om Vishnupad Srimad Bhaktisiddhant Saraswati Goswami Maharaj. Such a great soul is called Naistika Brahmachari. Again, Srila Prabhupada mentions in the 3rd canto, chapter 22, text number 5 in the purport, Manu described herewith the result of seeing a great saintly person. Lord Chaitanya says that one should always try to associate with saintly persons, because if one establishes a proper association with a saintly person, even for a moment, one attains all perfections. Somehow or other, if one meets a saintly person and achieves his favor, then the entire mission of one's human life is fulfilled. In our personal experience, we have actual proof of this statement of Manu. Once we had the opportunity to meet Vishnupad Sri Srimad Bhaktisiddhant Saraswati Goswami Maharaj, and on first sight, he requested this humble self to preach the message in the Western countries. There's no preparation for this, but somehow or other he desired it, and by his grace, we are now engaged in executing his order, which has given us a transcendental occupation and has saved and liberated us from the occupation of material activities. Thus, it is actually a fact that if one meets a saintly person, completely engaged in transcendental duties and achieves his favor, then one's life mission becomes complete. What is not possible to achieve in thousands of lives can be achieved in one moment if there's an opportunity to meet a saintly person. It is therefore enjoined in Vedic literatures that one should always try to associate with saintly persons and try to disassociate oneself from the common man. Because by one word of a saintly person, one can be liberated from material entanglement. A saintly person has the power, because of his spiritual advancement, to give immediate liberation to the conditioned soul. Here Manu admits that all his doubts are now over because Kardama has very kindly described the different duties of individual souls. So Srila Prabhupada, through this purport of Srimad Bhagavatam about Manu and Kardama Muni, is glorifying Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur through his own experience, through his own pratyaksh, his own direct experience, that by the association of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, he was able to to spread the Krishna consciousness movement. Again, not taking any credit for himself, but giving all credit to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. One other pastime is there, time's running out. But one very important pastime of Srila Prabhupada with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur is in 1932, I think it was. He went with his one small child from Prayag to meet Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur in Braj, who was having the Braj Mandal Prikrama, just like ISKCON does the Braj Mandal Prikrama. So he was started by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and he was in Radhakund, and he was giving discourses on Upanishads. And while he was giving the discourses, the first few days, many Babajis came and were sitting there listening to the discourses. But after some time, the Babajis from around Radhakund, they stopped coming. And he inquired, what happened? Why they're not coming? And they replied, well, they're not interested to hear Upanishads. They want to hear Leela. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said, they're not living in Radhakund, they're living in Narakund. So at that same time, Srila Prabhupada met Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and he instructed him. Right? He said that there's a fire in the mutt. There's a fire in the mutt. Because although they had opened the Bagh Bazar Gaudiya Mutt, the big marble temple, right, the devotees were bickering over who will sit in what room. Right? And he was telling him, better to sell the marble in the temple and print books. So he gave an instruction to Srila Prabhupada that if you ever get money, print books. Right? And he took that to heart. And Srila Prabhupada later said that I didn't know what would be the result of that instruction, but I followed it. In 1944, he started the Back to Godhead magazine. Right? He was printing, writing all the articles, getting it printed, and even distributing those magazines, all by himself. Right? Back to Godhead magazine. And then somebody mentioned, if you print magazines, after some time they're discarded, but if you print the books, they'll keep that. Right? So at that time he started printing the Srimad Bhagavatam, translating and printing Bhagavatam. So one interesting thing Brahmananda told is that Srimad Bhagavatam was actually written in Chandi Chowk in a place called Chippiwada, right? Because Chippiwada, all the printers, paper suppliers, they're all right there in that Naya Sarak, right? And Chippiwada actually means, right, it's a colloquial expression. Chippi means chapna. Chapna means printing. Wadi means place. So it's a place where they do printing. Chippiwada, right? Yeah? So Prabhupada was staying there in that temple in Chippiwada, translating, giving his translation to the printer, getting a proof, right? Making the corrections, giving it back, right? And he couldn't do that from Vrindavan because it was a lot of interaction with the printer. Right? And then after he got his 3 volumes of the first canto printed, then he went to America. Right? So he got that instruction in Radhakund, and it's really the basis of our Krishna consciousness movement, right? And when Srila Prabhupada, in that same Los Angeles lecture where he was giving all the credit to his Guru Maharaj, he said, so kindly help me. Print as many books in as many languages as you possibly can and distribute them all over the world. And the Krishna consciousness movement will automatically spread. So on this day we can dedicate ourselves to that instruction that Srila Prabhupada got, make it our life and soul, as Srila Prabhupada made it his life and soul. And in this way, the Krishna consciousness movement will continue to spread as the glories of Srila Bhaktisiddhant Saraswati Thakur and Srila Prabhupada will continue to spread. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki, Srila Bhaktisiddhant Saraswati Goswami Maharaj ki, Nitai Gaur Premanande.